Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features X-Men, adjectiveless X-Men, number 16, cover dated January 1993. And this is part 11 of the 12-part X-Cutioner song, so it's the penultimate chapter of the crossover. So the cover here by Andy Kubert and Mark Pennington, featuring the strike team that goes to the moon to rescue Scott and Jean, and right in the center of it we've got a pretty dynamically posed Cable. And beside the cover here we have the Skybox trading card that was included in the original polybag, which this issue came in. So the image of Archangel there by Brandon Peterson, inked by Al Milgrom and colored by Paul Mounts. And if I turn this one over, we have text from Strife's strike file. Which Warren Worthington will come out to play tonight? Upright and moral protector of mutant kind, or self-deluded avenging angel of death? It comes down to a matter of which side of the coin Warren wishes lands face up. So there you go. Let's take that away and open up the issue to the splash page. So again, picking up from the previous chapter in X Factor 80, at the end of X Factor 86. So we have the trio of Cable, Bishop and Wolverine, who have used Cable's body slide technology to body slide to the moon. They've entered Strife's moon base, formerly Apocalypse's, and they've been met by hostile welcomers. So we see here Bishop asking what the course of action should be. And Wolverine responds, "Bishop, you've this gift for the obvious, don't you, bub?" Let's turn over the page to get a double page spread. And really, what is their course of action? It's to start blasting. So they're faced with the Dark Riders, who, after Apocalypse was defeated by Strife, now serve Strife, following Apocalypse's own tenet of survival of the fittest. They serve the fittest, and they deem Strife the fittest. And we also have random members here of the MLF, also in service to Strife. So the title of this particular issue is 23 pages long, is Conflicting Cathexes. And cathexis is a technical term from psychoanalysis, and it means emotional investment in a person, object, or idea. So I guess it's got something to do with Strife and his emotional investment in Scott and Jean, and Scott in particular. And of course there's this ongoing question as regards what exactly is Strife's relationship to Scott and Jean. What is his identity? Is he Nathan Christopher? Is he the baby, Scott and Madeline Pryor's baby, that was sent into the far distant future at the end of X Factor number 68 to be treated for the techno-organic virus that he was infected with by Apocalypse on the moon? So, creative team here: Fabian Nicieza, writer; Andy Kubert, penciler; Mark Pennington, inker. But Andy Kubert inks the last 4 pages himself, so I'll make note of that when we get to those last 4 pages. Chris Eliopoulos, letterer; and Joe Rosas, colorist. And I always like Joe Rosas' vibrant colors, and you can see them well here on this particular double page spread. So let's continue. We get a bit of banter among the trio as they lash out Wolverine, tearing to bits with his adamantium claws the armored goons of the MLF, and Bishop blasting away at the Dark Riders, but noting that no sooner does he blast one away, then twice that number continue the assault. So they're getting nowhere here. Cable then, blasting away too, and noting that the odds are ridiculous for even the best poker player in town. But Bishop says he's not listening, Cable. Cable responds, "I know, he's too caught up in one of his berserker rages." Wolverine, looking a bit berserker-ish in this panel, says he isn't, even as he slices one of the Dark Riders here with his claws. But he says he's just not going to waste his time jawing while you two replay the Alamo. So a lot of action in this issue. It's pretty fast paced. He's blasted here by Gauntlet, and Bishop thinks, you know, maybe that he's been shot down, and how badly injured is he? Wolverine here, his healing factor kicking in, and he says, hold on, ribs shattered, punctured a lung, healing factor kicking in. Now, there was at the time in the letters pages afterwards a little bit of controversy about this line of Wolverine's. How can his rib be shattered when it's laced with adamantium? It should be unbreakable, yes? And like, what's the cause of such an injury? The blast from Gauntlet banging up against the wall here looks like a little error that should have been caught by editorial. But I think we know by now Bob Harras isn't really editing these issues all that carefully, yes? And here we've got another great splash page of the strike team picked by Havok in X Factor 86 arriving on the moon via Apocalypse's ship. So here they are coming in through the hole in the wall of the moon base. Pretty dynamic stuff. And also a use of screen tone here on Storm's Cape by Mark Pennington. That's a nice little detail there. And then we pick up with Strife in his control room as he's watching the battle on his base, happening on his base. And he says here, he finds it unsettling, he says it to Zero, he finds it unsettling that after so long, after years built upon years of planning, that he sits there a spectator to the very events he manufactured. Odder still, he says, that I should have manufactured my own past at all, isn't it? So that's fairly riddling. And then we see him looking over this holographic projection of the battle. Look at them, such a diversity of style and manner, all with the same overriding and overwhelming goal: to protect, preserve, and perpetuate the foolish dream that Homo superior can exist in harmony with Homo sapien, Professor X's dream. And he continues here, quite predictably, they rout my forces. So, but how can they fight the inevitability of time? How can they stop the turning of the day, the crashing of the waves? How can they defeat me when I am there tomorrow? So one of these Chris Eliopoulos style, open, for colour, emphasized words. But he's not doing it too much in this particular issue. There it is in that caption up there. But he's not overdoing it like he has been doing on certain previous chapters of the crossover. So maybe he decided himself he didn't like the look of it in some of the finished issues, or maybe somebody else had a word with him about that. He's restrained in this particular issue with that device. So Strife comes down off his throne and he heads out onto the surface, he heads elsewhere in the base, entering into this cell, Zero accompanying him in the background. And of course we know who's going to be in the cell. Yes, it's Scott and Jean. He grabs them with his telekinesis and takes them outside of the base onto the surface of the moon. And Jean asks him, where are you taking us? Why to the end, Miss Grey? To the bitter end. It's a little family stroll, he says, they're taking, which will do them all a world of good. So that is interesting. Again, more hints in terms of the relationship, the family relationship there. Also, this little speech up here where he addresses Jean and Scott in some on-the-nose for the reader terms. Come, mistress of the future storm, it is time for you and quote-unquote Father Misery to come out and play. So interesting there to think about Strife in terms of being Nathan Christopher, Madeline Pryor's son, that he would regard Jean Grey, whom Scott is not married to at this point and wasn't when he went off to join Jean, the resurrected Jean, in X Factor and leave his wife, that he would refer to her and address her as a mistress. And you know, again, going back to the title of this issue, cathexis, the psychoanalytic term, Fabian Nicieza bringing out the fact that we've got a Freudian family romance going on in this particular issue, and Strife's problems with his father, if Cyclops is his father, and Jean Grey as well. And then we switch back to the X-Mansion at nighttime, and we've got Professor X, who in X-Factor 86, Apocalypse rid him of the techno-organic virus that Strife shot into him in the first part of the crossover. And even though his body's healing mentally, he's struggling, and we see here a montage of some dream images he's having, war in the future, a mother and child, and himself in a kind of a cruciform position as well. So some interesting ideas here: war, crucifixion, as upside down, inverted, and mother and child. Is this Madeline Pryor here that we're seeing? And Hank the Beast worried about Professor X, and as he asks here, what is going on inside that incredible brain right now? And then we're back to the moon, and the fight continues. Or actually, the fight is over, rather, because of the arrival of the strike team. And so now the team splits up. So Havok is in charge of the operation, and he creates these two sub-strike teams: Polaris, Cannonball, Cable and I are Alpha, Psylocke, Wolverine and Storm Beta Unit. So here we have them over here. So we've got old teammates of the Outback team going together, and of course they'll be under Storm's command. And Apocalypse decides to go it alone. As he says here, he's going to hunt alone. Who's he going after? Strife. And we've got left in the back of it all Iceman, Warren and Bishop. And they're going to form their own little team, which Iceman calls Delta Team, or let's be Delta House, as he deadpans there. And so they head off as well, but we don't see them again for the rest of the issue. And then we pick up with Beta Team here, who Wolverine is on the scent of Scott and Jean, but we're told that he, what is it here? He has a scent of 4 of them coming this way, but the trail stops here. And Psylocke uses her telepathy to search for Scott and Jean, but she says here Strife's definitely masking his mind against my probes, but I do sense faint residual traces of Cyclops. Or actually, look, there is a misspelling here, Cylops. Okay, so Chris Eliopoulos maybe rushing the lettering here. Behind that door up ahead. And Wolverine asks, what about Jeannie? Bets, she should be with Scotty. I only sense Scott, Logan, she says. And Wolverine says, I caught Jean's scent to Ororo. Seems to reason her psychic imprint would be here as well. And Storm says, as our only remaining telepath, we must trust in Psylocke's gifts. So it's a little puzzle here as to why Psylocke isn't picking up Jean's telepathic trace. Is Strife blocking it as well as his own? Or is it a case that Jean is blocking her mind to Psylocke because of what we've seen in previous issues of Uncanny X-Men, and in particular X-Men itself, adjectiveless X-Men, regarding this little subplot of a romantic interest between Scott and Psylocke, that Psylocke has been flirting with Scott and he feels attracted to her. Is that what is going on? Anyway, she uses her telepathy to get an imprint of the coded lock sequence, and so she opens the lock, and what's beyond the door? Well, it turns out to be a vacuum. So the door leads out into space. So they're in an emergency situation here, trying to close the door. They close it, And then the question is, where are Scott and Jean? They're out on the surface of the moon. Storm communicates it to Alpha Team here. And we've got a nice little character moment between Sam, Cannonball, and Cable here. Sam wants to talk and have it out with Cable, whom he hasn't seen since X-Force number 13. He's demanding that they talk now, but Cable's insistent that they talk later, and suggests using Apocalypse's ship to go out on the moon and go after Scott and Jean. And we've got a little moment here between Lorna and Alex, where Lorna says, nice rapport those two have. Huh? Ironically, yes. And here we've got Apocalypse on his own, frustrated with his weakness and telling himself and enjoining himself to press on and be strong. But he's faced then by his own creations, the Dark Riders, and they say, just you have found us, Father, just the way you wanted us, ready to fight to win. And so they go up against Apocalypse and fight to the death, in line with the principle of survival of the fittest. And then we switch to Apocalypse's ship and Alpha Team moving, closing in on Scott and Jean's location. And here's the point now where Mark Pennington bows out of the inking, and we've got Andy Kubert inking his own pencils. So this is very interesting. I always find it intriguing when an artist, a penciler, inks their own work. And we can see that the art here is more open because Mark Pennington, let me just switch back here to the Apocalypse pages. He uses definitely a brush for some of his inking. We can see it here, in particular in the way that he renders the forearm hair here. And also here, the shadow on the side of Cable's nose is also rendered with a brush. So and some of the cross-hatching here on Apocalypse's, the musculature on his arm also rendered with a brush. But Andy Kubert, to my mind, on his 4 pages, is using primarily a pen nib for inking. It seems to me that way. And you can see it here with the way that he's rendering the arm hair on Cable, or the stubble on Cable's jaw, different from Pennington's style. And the difference is Kubert is definitely using a pen nib for some of this inking on his pages. And it may be that he's roughing out the pencils and finishing the art in ink. But anyway, back to the story. They track Strife, Scott and Jean to this particular tower on the moon. And then we switch back to the X Mansion, and Professor X comes too, and he's got some things to say. That Cable and Strife, Apocalypse and Sinister, Scott and Jean, I saw them inside and out. He says the dreams, the plans, they're all designs, grand designs, machinations of a sort, and all of us were all ghosts in that machine. Scott and Jean and Cable and Strife, all of them linked to us in love and hate, but most of all linked to each other in blood. So there's a blood relation among them. And what happens is Alpha Team makes its way to the tower, but there is a force field, an invisible force field, that knocks out Cannonball and Polaris, but it allows Cable and Havok through. So the mystery is why, as Cable asks, why does it let them in? And well, you know, the implication is maybe they're related by blood, Havok and Cable. And here's our final page, and we have this tableau facing Cable and Havok. Strife here at the center of it. Scott and Jean apparently under Strife's control, maybe unconscious. And we have little images going on here of the past, the X-Men's past, Sentinel and Cyclops, Angel, Magneto, and then this odd little image of Professor X and Colossus, which maybe refers back to Uncanny X-Men 279 perhaps, when Colossus was under the control of the Shadow King. And what does Strife say on this final page? I would have thought the answer to be obvious by now. He says to Cable, and you've always said as to why Havok and Cable were able to get through the force field. And you've always said you didn't need a crystal ball to predict it, haven't you? Let us have a chat, you and I, my failed brother. Let us talk of time lost and time gained, of twisted futures and lost pasts. Let us talk, Nathan, of life and death. And so next week, in X-Force number 18, the conclusion to X-Cutioner's song, Cable versus Strife, to the finish is what we're promised here. So, the penultimate chapter. I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on X-Men number 16. If you did, please like the video in YouTube. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.